Cillian Dunne, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You lived with a dictator's right-hand man. Was he as evil as everyone from the outside would make it out?
Absolutely not. No. I mean, I lived with the guy for about 4 months overall, spread across 2 years. And I mean, the guy had committed some atrocities, to say the least. But I actually found him to be like incredibly personable. He was like extremely loyal, and he was like, you know, I was a guest in his home, so of course he wanted to sort of show off like Panama at its best and the Panamanian people at its best. But like, you know, he took great care of me. It was a little intense, as I'm sure you can imagine. You know, he was like a triple spy trained by like Mossad in Israel, like the CIA, DEA, and then I guess Fidel Castro too.
When you say intense, why was it intense?
He was just he had the ability to sort of know what you were thinking at all times, so you couldn't be like disingenuous with him. So like my motivation for going there was to write a book, like using his story to write a book that where, you know, he's the main character, but like the themes overall relate to something much greater, which, you know, I'm sure we'll get into a good bit later on. But Carlos knew that his story was sort of like a conduit to tell a bigger story. And, you know, he didn't let me get my answers easily all the time. So I had to like really pry. Like, for instance, Manuel Noriega, who was the dictator, is sort of infamous for being accused of like drug trafficking, money laundering, things of that nature. People put him in the same box as like Pablo Escobar, when in fact he was like a little bit closer to a Fidel Castro. And Carlos like never wanted to speak to me about like any of the illicit things that he or the dictator were accused of. So I had to walk on eggshells, quite frankly, a lot of the time. Living with him, I couldn't get him to become like super fiery because he was incredibly volatile. And like one little slip up could have meant like us fist fighting in his living room.
So why was he playing hard to get, and why wasn't he giving you the information when you asked?
It's just like, he's a product of this sort of era of espionage where, like the Cold War, you know, the Cold War, everything was clandestine, discreet, like behind closed doors. Carlos was very much a product of that. So he's really tight-lipped in general. Like if he has a secret, he sees it as like leverage instantly. So he doesn't give you anything like easily, and you don't get things from him easily, if that makes sense. It's almost like a way of life for him that he has to be tight-lipped, and it all ties into his loyalty and sort of his own personal beliefs about like human relationships, and yeah, so I had to pry and like win him over, and there were some like really intense moments where, you know, we like both of our motivations came to the forefront, and I was like, listen, I want to write like the best fucking book possible here. Like I want to win like a Pulitzer Prize. Like I want to go all the way. And Carlos was like, well, I want to have a legacy. Like I want my children and their children to be able to read about my life. So we had to like sort of find where those two motivations intersected. And to do that, it just took time, like walking on eggshells, like figuring out what could we talk about very openly and what could we talk about like more subtly. And then I would have to like take what I learned from Carlos's conversation and go out and find those extra details by myself. So it was intense. Like it was a tough environment.
Why did he want you to live with him if he wasn't willing to share?
He shared like his story, right? He shared what he wanted me to hear, and I knew that. I'd been like warned about that before going to that. You know, he saw this book as his legacy. He was going to tell me the best possible story where he comes out like John Wayne, like where he comes out as like the hero. But living with him, he did it because he wanted to see how I lived, like what kind of a person I was like outside of the interviews. So like after we would literally wake up at like 8 a.m., have breakfast together. Like he loved to drink, so we would start drinking at like 9 a.m. And it got, you know, fiery and like all that sort of stuff that comes with drinking alcohol and asking like these really crazy questions. But he basically just wanted to like see what kind of a person I was like all the time. And part of the reason why it was so intense is because like he wouldn't really let me leave. So I wasn't allowed to like leave his presence. And if I did, he had this like Colombian girlfriend, this lovely woman, Natasha, who like if I wanted to go for a walk, he would like send Natasha like out with me so that I like could never be alone. So there was an element of distrust where like I'm a gringo coming down from the United States, even though I'm Irish, coming down to Panama where like they have a terrible relationship with gringos just because of their history. And, you know, there's that hurdle to get over right away. And then secondly, like he is spilling secrets, even though he told me his story, like his story still had like incredible amounts of never before heard, you know, stories and major secrets and like testimonials essentially about world leaders that like nobody's ever heard. So yeah, it took a while to sort of get there, let's say. But the tension was just high because of that. It was like a pressure cooker. Like I was constantly being put to the test.
How did it feel being trapped where you couldn't leave and not be followed?
It was fucking terrifying. I remember on like my third day there, I woke up so hungover because like all we did was drink and talk, which was great. I got like dozens, if not like well over 100 hours of like great recordings from those conversations. But like, I mean, I woke up day 3 like covered in sweat, like anxiety super high, and I was freaking out, and this would have never happened, but I like took a picture of myself in the bedroom that I was staying in, just like looking like complete shit, being like, okay, like if I genuinely don't come back to the US after this is what I looked like when it all went south, you know? And I was like genuinely like really freaked out. But that's sort of like day 3, like when things were really at its lowest, that was when we connected the most. That's when he had his light bulb moment, like, okay, this kid's struggling to tell my story. Like, because I quit my job to do basically I quit my job to do this and to do another project, but I was practically homeless. I didn't have anywhere to live. I had no money. I was like flying down to Panama on other people's dimes that were like sort of funding me during this book process. But dude, even if I went back to the US, I was like, I'm going to be like in my car or like couch surfing. So my life was already like pretty low. And so I just like sucked it up. And then Carlos, I think, recognized that. And then on that trip specifically, we just like really connected, and the conversations flowed easier. And he was sort of like, okay, I know you're really in this, like let's do it. Like little by little, I'm going to give you better secrets and like more in-depth information about the relationship between myself and the dictator Noriega.
So was it what you were expecting when you went there, or did you not have any expectation?
I was like a blank slate. I had like no expectations whatsoever. I took the opportunity because I didn't have anywhere else to go, and I just finished writing a book in like a high risk environment where I was I wrote like a prison book about Bloods and Crips in California, in South Central Los Angeles. And to do that, I interviewed like some, you know, really crazy motherfuckers, like some guys who have done some really terrible things. So I felt really confident in my ability to interview and extract information from people that have like know what it's like to murder someone, or know what it's like to, you know, be a con man, and you know, and at the very, I guess at the highest end of that spectrum, like Carlos was somebody who just had like an incredible story that that is rooted in the foundation of like criminal activity. Like I just love the sound of it. So I went blank slate, didn't know what to think, barely spoke Spanish, and just like sort of like hoped that everything would work out. And then with every introduction or every meeting or every conversation that I would have with like a stakeholder of the story, I got more welcomed, or like the feelings that I got were like sort of more welcoming. My knowledge expanded, and then I got a few like breaks in terms of like my confidence. Like I met this American journalist in Central America, this guy Richard Coster, who he worked for Newsweek based out of DC for a long time, and he's just like one of the most knowledgeable people about Cold War history in Central America. And I met with the guy, and like he sort of just gave me his good graces, and he gave me so much information, and it just like day by day it got easier. Even though like the risk was sort of like looming over the entire time. Like my parents were calling me every day being like, where are you? Like, share your location. Like, what do you mean you're 7 hours outside of like Panama City, like at some rural beach house where like you won't have service for 3 days? Like that's literally what it was like. So it was scary, but I kind of just like like the only way out is through, you know, I just got to get through it.
Let's go back to the first question though. How is he not evil, being the right-hand man of a dictator?
I think like it's the word evil there is obviously it's really strong. And I think that a lot of his actions were evil, but I think that people live in, and like this isn't my own thought that I conjured up, but it's something that I've come to believe over time, just from interviewing all these different kinds of people, that I think people live in different realities. I don't think there's one reality. I think there are multiple different realities. Like you and I live in a different reality, and when you converge those two realities, there's going to be like differences, you know what I mean? And when people find differences in one another, sometimes that sort of escalates to violence or things of that nature. I think that with Carlos, I think he was so convicted in his beliefs while he was the right-hand man of Noriega that like murdering someone for the cause was the right thing to do in his head, where like you and I would hear that and we'd be like, no, bro, that's straight up murder. Like that's, you know, that's a sin. Like you can't do that. And I think we're in the right there, but Carlos likely would have never thought that he was in the wrong for doing that, because he was like Machiavellian in a way, like the end justifies the means, like everything is sort of done for a reason. And a lot of Carlos's reasoning for doing these horrible things, these evil things, were for like, you know, essentially for him and Noriega or their regime to remain in power. So
how does that make him not evil though?
I don't know. I guess like, would you say like Barack Obama's an evil person?
Well,
how many bombs did he drop on Syria? Like, or how many bombs were dropped on Syria while he was president of the US? I wouldn't describe Obama as an evil person. But
I guess what's interesting is they're defending their home land, but a dictatorship is kind of being cruel to their homeland. And so I understand where you're coming at here, but murder's murder, and
totally.
Murdering your family is pretty brutal and evil, I would consider, no matter the intent behind it and the programming and the cause. I struggle to see how someone that is doing harm to their own team as something that's not evil.
I think it's absolutely like the actions are evil. My frame of thought is more like anybody is capable of like doing evil things. If that makes them an evil person, which, you know, there's a lot of merit to that, then yeah, you can absolutely label that. Like you could label Carlos as an evil person, no problem. But I am not labeling Carlos an evil person.
Do you think it's because you have more context on who he is?
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, was he an evil person before you met him?
I think he did terrible things, but I think, like, I know what you're getting at. I absolutely have bias. Like, I wrote 2/3 of the book from his perspective. Like, I had to get into his shoes, and to be able to do that, you can't have any prejudice against your characters. You know, it's like a big thing in writing. Like, you can't judge your characters for their actions. So, I mean, hell yeah, Carlos did terrible things, you know, most of which I still don't really know about. He never would have divulged that information. Carlos's own children even said to me and a couple other partners in my project that, you know, there's no way he told me like all of the crazy things that he did, like all the terrible things, because going back to what I said earlier, like his motivation for this book was to have a legacy, to sort of, you know, when after he dies, that his like life and his life story will live on, like, you know, in memory or whatever. And so that's inherently wrong too, you know what I mean? Because he's embellishing facts. Like, I can't trust that story. So what I did was I tried to back up what he said by hunting down documentation, which I ultimately did do. But when it comes to like very specific incidents of killing other people, like he was open about a lot of it. And I absolutely do think that those are like evil acts, but I just don't think it's as black and white as like someone's like good or evil. I think there's a little bit more of a spectrum, but let's just say Carlos teeters on the evil side of that spectrum for sure. He was capable, like sociopathic, capable of compartmentalizing parts of himself, like being a different person around other kinds of people. Like, you know, those are like manipulative traits of his character, which is like evil. You know, you're like deceiving someone else, and he was capable of doing all that stuff. But I'm really open about it. Like, I really came to like the guy and like care for the guy. I lived with him. I met all his family. It's weird how you can see like so much normality in the life of someone who has lived like such a larger than life. Like, Carlos owned a restaurant with Fidel Castro. Like, he sat in boardrooms where major political decisions were being made in the Cold War in Central America. And then I'm sitting in his living room and his kids are like joking around and pulling out like family photos, being like, this is when we went fishing at the lake when we were 11 years old. And that same year, if you Google it in like just even, or ask ChatGPT or whatever and say, you know, list all the bad things done in Panama in 1984, like it will give you like a very detailed list of like political opposition that were excommunicated, people that were assassinated, like civilians that were shot down, like protesting in the streets. You know, you can't like justify any of those actions, but the reason why I think Carlos's story matters is because the world has only really been told one version of this sort of whole story when it comes to Panama and Noriega and ultimately the US invasion of Panama in 1989. But the story that they tell is that, you know, evil dictator has a stranglehold over his nation. He needs to be taken out of his throne because he's a threat to like national security. All of that has merit to it. But what nobody ever talks about is that for literally decades, the CIA and DEA and the US government were like best friends with these guys. They were using them. And yeah, both parties were benefiting, but I like to describe it as when the US needed their trash taken out in Latin America, they would call Noriega. And like, so Carlos was a part of that sort of little squad. So the Americans would call and they'd be like, we have a problem with Castro in Cuba. Like, let's say Castro's taken 12 of our men hostage, 12 CIA guys hostage. Like, we need you to go figure that out. And they would do it, you know, and they would do it mostly on behalf of the American interests. So
why did they do it?
They, you know, everybody sort of that I spoke to seemed to have their own different kind of motivations. Like Carlos, his motivation throughout this time was to remain loyal to Manuel Noriega by any means necessary. So he really truly devoted his life to protect the dictator. He just like that he was fired up by it. Like anything that could potentially happen to Noriega, like Carlos always wanted to be several steps ahead. Noriega's motivation throughout all this, I think, was a little bit more sinister and like narcissistic. You know, he had this massive inflated ego. Like he really thrived on that power, and he thrived on power as so many leaders do. He thrived on power like in these really big settings, like in the masses, but he would thrive on power in like these really small settings too. So he loved like being one-on-one in like a negotiation and just like really belittling the guy and like attacking him and just using these really terrible manipulative techniques to get what he wanted, which ultimately was just power and influence. Which is why like he could have never remained in that throne. But a guy like him should have never been in that position anyway, you know, which it's kind of an interesting thought. Like he was put there by the US government and the CIA, but, you know, he was this rabid dog this whole time, you know?
How does a dictatorship form?
You know, there's a lot of sort of like repetitive or like cyclical aspects to this. Like if you look around the world and you see that usually a coup, there's like a political party or like a family or whatever in power, and then a coup usually starts up, a coup d'etat.
What's a coup d'etat? A
coup d'etat is basically when rebels rise up against the government and try to like overthrow the government. So an example of a coup d'etat is in Iran in the 1950s. In 1953, there was like a coup d'etat against the family that was running Iran, and it all had to do with the oil. So the rebels were like, we are giving away all our oil to Britain and to the US. They're the ones that are profiting from this, not us. We want to take control over over our government so that we can control the oil. And so a coup started. But what usually happens is, like, America usually backs one side, the American friendly side, and then like Russia backs the other side. So it's like a proxy war. Yeah, and so when a dictatorship happens is, like, let's say those rebels are being backed by the CIA, and they overthrow their government, and those rebels now become the government, the political power that's leading the nation. The US is basically like, or the CIA is basically like, okay, we scratched your back, now scratch ours. So, like, let's say in the case of a country with a lot of oil, the rebels take over the government. The rebels are pro-America, or like, they claim to be pro-America because they've been taking money and weapons from the CIA. Typically, when that happens, it's a dictatorship, right? It's like, if it's a military overthrow of a country, usually the military strong arm, like the general, becomes the dictator, like Noriega did. And then the US or like the CIA, especially during the Cold War, just squeezed everything they could out of those nations that, yeah.
So who was the government in Panama before it became a dictatorship?
It's a good question. So there were two like main dictators in Panama during the Cold War. So Noriega was from 1983 to 1989, but from 1968, really 1969 to 1981, this guy Omar Torrijos was the dictator. Now, when the coup d'etat happened in 1968 in Panama, that's ultimately saw Omar Torrijos become the dictator. It was like a really complex one because there were two successors from the rebels. One was a guy, Boris Martinez, who was like the Americans' pick, basically. And then the other guy was Omar Torrijos, who was a socialist, who sort of, his ideologies leaned more in the direction of like Fidel Castro and like, communism. So when so the dust settled from that coup, Omar Torrijos edged out the Americans' candidate. So the Americans had to deal with this guy who was like a socialist in Panama, and they didn't really want to do that, but they had no choice because the people really loved Omar Torrijos, and he was like, even like to this day, like if you bring up his name in Panama, they're like, yeah, we know he was a dictator, but like we liked him. He was sort of like how like Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, like when he first came into power as like a socialist dictator, the poor people of the country like really loved him. It's sort of like a cyclical thing that happens all over the world, but Omar Torrijos didn't really want to serve American interests like his whole life, or especially like his whole career as a leader. So in 1977, he negotiates the Panama Canal Treaty with President Jimmy Carter of the US. And what that essentially meant was that the Panama Canal would no longer belong to the United States. It would now belong to Panama. And the reason why that became a problem was because the Panama Canal generates so much money. I think like 5 to 7% of the world's trade like passes through it. So just incredible amounts of money just from taxes and tariffs and stuff like that. So Torrijos does this like really huge thing for Panama, for his nation and for their independence and basically like for their future. And then in 1981, he mysteriously dies in a plane crash. It's pretty mysterious because the plane like flew into the side of a mountain called Cerro Marta, and Carlos claimed that because nobody believes it, right? Like even like young kids in Panama, it's like a conspiracy. But I met up with this journalist in Panama who said that there were eyewitness reports of like the plane exploding in midair. I spoke to an air traffic controller who like used to be like an army guy, and his theory was that these like sort of beacons were moved that like essentially they operated as almost like a sonar for the plane. So in periods of like, fog or like at times where like you can't really see that far ahead, like from the cockpit, you like rely on these beacons. And this guy claimed that, he acknowledged that somebody moved one of these beacons like in the mountain range, and the plane didn't know that the mountain was there, and it just like flew into it. But either way, all of these conspiracies come back to Manuel Noriega, who ultimately becomes the dictator like directly afterwards. And a lot of people think that the CIA and the US government like paid Noriega to take out Omar Torrijos, to pop him, or to like, kill him while he was on the plane or whatever. And I think there's a lot of merit to that, because if you look at the way like these like coups and these like military overthrows, or a transition in regimes, usually the dictator like dies or like is assassinated, you know what I mean? And the outcome of that is always someone else comes into that position who is now the point of contact for like the US government. So in this case, Omar Torrijos hadn't really been a friend of the US since he came to power in 1969, because he was a socialist who believed Fidel Castro was correct and the US government wasn't. Noriega, on the other hand, was like, whatever you ask me to do, like, I'll do it. So the theory, and like what I believe, and what, Carlos kind of told me but was like really hesitant, was that this transition was because the US were like, okay, let's take this guy out so that you can sit in the throne, Manuel. And now when we need to ask you guys for favors, when we need you to take our trash out, we're going to come directly to you, and we won't have to worry about Torrijos or this guy in the middle to say no to us.
Why didn't the US just take over Panama?
I guess like they absolutely could. And I'm not like an economist by any means, but I do know that when you swallow up like a new nation, like you're taking on all their debt, and like you're taking on all of their issues. So it probably just wasn't worth it. But Panama, like if you go there, it's like, obviously you're in a Central American nation, like visually, you're not in the US, but they use the US dollar. Like Panama City literally looks like Miami. It's like high rises, like on the water. It's like a lot of things are really modeled off of the US. So in a way, it's like the US has this territory that they don't have to call like part of the US. They don't have to like worry about any of their problems, but they can benefit from all of like the good things that come out of that country, which in this case, in Panama's case, is the Panama Canal, the banking system there, which is like, people call it like the Switzerland of the Americas. It's just like, for a long time, not really anymore, but it was very like loose, so a lot of people could like launder money there. And then like natural resources, there have been like a lot of issues recently in Panama where like mining companies are like bribing the Panama government to excavate in like these really sort of like these geologically important areas of the nation that are just like fucking up natural wildlife and stuff like that. So people take advantage of this third world nation all the time.
So Manuel Noriega?
Noriega. Yeah.
So he passed away in 2015, you were saying?
I think 2017. Yeah.
What happens to the country, or to Panama, when the dictator who's running the place dies?
So he hadn't been the dictator for like nearly 30 years at that point.
Right. So how does someone get kicked out of the dictator, and what happened 30 years prior?
So in this case, the US invaded Panama in 1989. They sent like 27,000 troops to Panama with the intention of extracting Manuel Noriega. Noriega had been indicted in 1988 by the US government, which essentially just means like he was accused of money laundering, drug trafficking, and racketeering. And basically, it was just like the US were just like painting him as like this horrible dictator.
Even though he had just been literally the puppet for them for the past so many years.
Exactly, yeah. And that's sort of like what a lot of people don't realize about this whole thing. But, they just like turned on him. And then in 1989, the US sends 27,000 troops to Panama. The Panama Defense Forces are like, might as well be like security guards compared to like the US Army. Like they have like the tanks, like they've got the jets like bombing these like really poor neighborhoods of Panama. Like there's no chance of Panama even being able to defend themselves. But they do this for 10 days. Noriega is on the run in his own country. He seeks shelter in the Vatican City embassy in Panama. I've never visited it, but it's like right in the city. And U.S. Army surround him for 10 days while they're sort of like doing what they do in the country and fighting off the troops or whatever. And then after 10 days, they get him out. You know, Noriega gives up. They fly him to Miami. He has a trial against these charges. Obviously, it's like a bullshit trial. Like there's, of course, he's guilty, but there actually isn't that much proof, like documented proof, that like sort of showed, even though like you know that he's guilty because of so many testimonials from people who were like, yeah, like I paid him off, or he was totally guilty of all these things, or like he is responsible for this murder or whatever. But the prosecution like really just like didn't have a lot of like documentation or like actual evidence to like prove it, which was really interesting. But either way, he goes to jail in Miami, I think for 11 years. Then the French are like, no, we want this guy. Like he's been money laundering in Paris for years. Like we want him to be serving time in a prison in Paris. So they extradite him to Paris somehow, put him in this like really horrible prison that I can't remember the name of. And he's there for a few years. Carlos actually moves to Paris Carlos moves to Paris so that he can like visit Noriega at prison every day. And Carlos, after being like on top of the world in like this dictatorship regime for like, you know, at least 15 years, Carlos is doing well in both regimes. He's now a busboy in Paris, like cleaning tables so that he can go see Noriega like after his shifts and see him every day in prison. Then in 2011, Panama are finally like, okay, we want him here. Like we want Noriega to die in one of our prisons. Noriega comes back. Carlos moves back to Panama with him. Noriega dies like 6 years later from like a botched surgery. He had like, they said that he did have a tumor. I think it turned out to be benign, but like he had like a brain hemorrhage during the surgery and like it tipped him over the edge, and he died like in like a hospital in Panama in 2017. But the majority of the country were like rejoiced. You know, they were like, you know, he's dead. Like the Wicked Witch of the West is dead. You know what I mean? Like he was like this villainous figure for so many people there. And I think rightly so. There's so much merit to that. But when Carlos tells this story, he's like, my best friend of 50 years like is dead. You know what I mean? Like he was like, I was in the room when he died. Like I would have like given my own life for Manuel to be able to spend like 10 more years alive on this earth. Like he really was like, I got the impression that Carlos wished he had died protecting Noriega.
Why was Carlos so loyal?
They had like they met because they had a relation, or well, Carlos' cousin married Noriega. That's how they met. But Noriega like really altered the course of Carlos's life from a very young age. Like Carlos grew up in this province called Chiriquí in Panama. Like it's not rich, it's not super poor, but Carlos like didn't grow up with a lot of money. So at a young age, he really didn't have a lot of direction. You know, I understand that his parents were hardworking people and, you know, they did their best or whatever. I didn't hear any negative stories, but Carlos was this kid who like fought, he gambled, loved cockfighting. Like he would like have like knife fights with kids in the streets like when he was like a teenager. Like he was a crazy motherfucker. But Noriega was at this stage like a very, I guess, promising student for the US military and for the National Guard in Panama. Like he was a young guy, but everybody knew him. He was top of his class in the Torrijos Military Academy in Peru, which is like, it's an infamous military school where like the CIA pick a lot of like hand select a lot of people out of there to ultimately become like assets for the US government and for the CIA. Noriega was hand selected as like a teenager. They were like, you know, this guy is, you know, intellectually bright, like physically, like he was what he was. He was a super small guy. But he was like very compliant, like a very good soldier. And so Noriega takes Carlos under his wing. Carlos is very much like in awe of this guy, like being so successful at such a young age. And Carlos like never knew anybody successful. So if Noriega told him to do something, Carlos would do it because ultimately Carlos wanted to sort of be along for the ride with Noriega. So it was in Carlos's best interest to sort of just do whatever Noriega did, and I think that that loyalty is a mix of like delusion and also I think he what's the word I'm looking for? Carlos shoots from the hip, like he's very, his gut always leads the way. So unless he has like a reason not to trust somebody, his first instinct is sort of to give you a chance. And I think Noriega just proved to him at such a young age that like he was always sort of going to have his back. To my knowledge, he always did. That Carlos was like, if you have my back, like I will literally take a bullet for you. So I think the relationship is hard to sum up, but they just like they acted like brothers,
What are some of the key lessons that you learnt from Carlos with your time with him that you've applied in life, and what are some takeaways that have changed the way you show up in the world?
I think it's a great question, and like I reflect upon like this whole thing all the time, dude. Like it's been 2 years. It changed everything for me. It changed the way that I see the world. But what I took from Carlos was that I need to have more conviction in what I say and what I do and what I believe. Like I think that something that I always struggled with and had like very little self-confidence with was like, are my opinions valid, or like is the way that I feel about this, or is the way that I'm thinking about this the right way to think? Like, will others understand this and will they like accept me for it? So that's just like me being like a little neurotic or whatever, or insecure. But with Carlos, I always I had to be convicted in every question that I asked him. If I contested him on something, I had to be convicted. And I've noticed that when I'm just like applying that to my own everyday life, if I'm more convicted in what I want and what I say, and just being more sure of myself and more certain about what I'm saying, people just take me a lot more seriously. And there are less roadblocks, both externally and internally, for me when I'm trying to get something done. So yeah, Carlos basically, like, in a way you could just say, like, have a pair of balls, like, do what you believe what you do.
Why do you think you lacked conviction and confidence before that?
I don't know. I think I was always just like, I was a super shy kid as a teenager in school. Like luckily I was never bullied or anything like that. I was just always like really quiet. I always just sort of thought that like nobody really wanted to hear what I had to say, and so I just didn't say anything. But then that almost opened the door to like writing for me as like a way of expression. So when I was like 18, I started sort of doing creative writing in my free time. I started out writing like screenplays for film, and then that led into the books. But as I continued to write, and like as I finished my first book and finished my second and my third, I sort of started noticing that like I was almost stagnant in life, in like the way that I was living, because I wasn't putting myself out there and like doing what I truly wanted to do and like trying to grow in the way that like I wanted to grow. So I tried to use like the books as like a way to justify everything. I'd be like, I just need to understand like different types of people better. If I'm going to write, 12 different characters in this book with 12 different realities and 12 different ways of seeing the world, like I have to like really go out there and like meet people who think like this. So doing that and just sort of pushing myself gave me more confidence in what I was doing. And then by the time I'm with Carlos, I'm 27 years old. I'm in Panama, like hardly speak Spanish, like really risky, like high tension environment. I just naturally developed more confidence in like what I really wanted to do, and I just had more conviction in my decisions, just because I really just did put myself out there. And this was like for me the ultimate putting myself out there moment, because I was out there.
Was it isolating growing up, being quiet and feeling like you needed to silence your thoughts because no one would respect them?
Yeah, definitely. If it weren't for my dad, I would have just stayed in my house, like writing or watching movies like the whole time. I would have really been a loner. But from a very young age, he pushed me to play like team sports. So I was a big like soccer guy and rugby, and that's how I got all my friends. I just like played sports, and I showed up, practiced 3 times a week, and then, you know, a match on the weekends. And it just, it made it easier for me to sort of not worry about like putting myself out there, because I had like these scheduled things that I had to show up to. And my dad was like the accountability for me there. Like if I didn't show up, he'd be like pissed, you know? But what I really always just wanted to do was just be alone. Like just to, especially when I started writing, like when I was 18, I was sort of coming out of my awkward phase like a little bit then, but I just really truly wanted to be alone and just like writing and being in my own head and like living in fairyland, like creating all these little stories. Like I just absolutely love it. But you know, that it just like that, there's no longevity to that. Like you gotta, if you want to be a good writer, like you gotta experience the world. So I just learned that, thankfully, after, you know, writing a couple books and growing up a little bit. And I just, yeah, like I said, just like put myself out there. But totally, like if you want to be a writer, like if you want this creative work, like you got to get used to being alone like 90% of the time. You just have to.
When did you move to America?
I moved to America when I was 19.
What did that look like?
It was easy for me because I was born in the States and I was raised in Ireland. But I, like, my dad would work in the US and he would almost like commute between Dublin and Boston quite a bit. His father, like my grandfather, was like sick when I was like 5 years old, and my dad said, okay, we're all going to go back to Ireland and like sort of be there with him while he's passing. And we just sort of stayed. And so I did all my schooling in Ireland, but I also spent a lot of time like on holidays in the US, and basically was raised in like 2 different places. So by the time I come to the US when I'm 19, I'm playing soccer at college, a college called Northeastern. I've got like my own built-in friends like right away, just kids on the team, makes it really easy. I was just like hyped up, like, you know, the way like obviously the 3 of us here are like all, you know, all live in different countries, and we're all like in the US as like young lads. Like there's like a really exciting feeling about coming to the US, especially a big city like LA. Like I used to go to Boston most of the time, but like whenever I go to like New York or Miami or something like that, like there's just, it's like electric. Like there's just something like so exciting about it that you just don't get like in Ireland or England or wherever you're from. Just the US is so unique. So it was a great feeling moving.
So where did times get low? Because you mentioned your time in LA before going to Panama. You were filming a documentary with Crips and Bloods and sleeping in your car. Go back to those times and how they were for you.
Yeah, man, they were tough. The Crips and the Bloods, like that book, I quit working full time to write it. So I had like zero income. I was relying off like very little savings. I had an apartment with a couple guys for like 4 more months when I started that project. So my goal was to get the prison book finished in 3 months, and then I would take 1 month to like find work so I could continue to pay rent. Finished the book in 3 months, released it, and then like a week after that, I get the call about Panama. So I have a decision to make. Do I want to go back working full time and be able to like pay rent and live here, or do I say yes to this opportunity in Panama, like with their former dictator's regime and like everyone speaking Spanish, and like basically like immediately it was like this massive mountain to overcome, but I said yes to it because I believed that was the right thing for me to do. My gut just told me. So I had to sacrifice like not making any money for a few months, like when I really got into the Panama stuff. And then after like 3 months of being involved in the project, then I'm here in LA. I'm not in Panama anymore, where everything's sort of paid for. I'm couch surfing. I'm sleeping in my car, and then this Irish woman, her name is Miriam. She's like a very good family friend of ours. Lets me sleep in her like pool house, in her and her husband's pool house, and I'm like sleeping with their dogs and stuff like that. And there's like no AC, and like it actually was like a really lovely little sort of space. But I was like in debt, going into debt, like broke as hell, you know, living in someone else's house basically, like with their dogs, waking up every day at like 6 a.m, getting into my car, going somewhere to like I used to eat like rotisserie chicken like in my car, like Ralph's rotisserie chicken like in the car park, like just really like lonely shit. But it was all just it was all just to like get the book done and to just like literally just like put everything that I had into telling like the best possible stories. So like, yeah, my life was absolutely terrible. Like I couldn't take girls on dates. I had no money. Like my friends were off like doing things like Friday through Sunday. They worked like 9 to 5 jobs. Like they were having fun. But I just couldn't relate to anybody during that time. So it was, psychologically like really tough, but I just put on my blinders and literally I was like, your life is going to be your life is going to get a lot better the more time you put into this. So just put in all the time you need, get this done as quick as possible the right way. And by the time it's all over, like you won't be sleeping on your friends' couches, or you won't be in your car, or you won't be sleeping with the dogs in a pool house. But, I look back on that time and I'm like, yeah, that was really tough, but like I'm so happy that I did it, because I'm not really afraid of like going backwards anymore. Like I'm not afraid. Like if God forbid, like if I ever find myself in a situation where I'm like homeless again, I like kind of know what to do to get myself out of it, because I've already done it. If that makes sense, it's like it's quite comforting. So, so yeah, dude. I mean the tough times aren't over. That's for sure. Like there's always going to be tough times, but that like sort of taking the leap of faith and like doing something creative, like I just like jumped right into the deep end and I was like drowning for a little bit, but like now I've got my little floaties and I feel fine,
Yeah, you're kind of tying yourself to a future outcome in the moment to keep you going, because without that you're just alone in a car eating a rotisserie chicken.
Yeah, dude, that isn't that just like the saddest image you've ever seen? Like it was so sad. It was so sad, dude. But yeah, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Like it just like put hair on my chest.
So you then went to this place called Panama, and you referenced to me, and you've said it before, that Panama is a third world country with a golden crown.
Yeah.
What's the golden crown?
The golden crown is the canal and the banking system. So I know I've already sort of like touched on the canal. Like I'm no economist, I'm not a banking expert, but the canal just generates a crap load of money for Panama, just through taxes and tariffs and like all that sort of stuff, and even just jobs for Panamanians. The banking system is like, there is so much wealth in Panama, like in the 1%, like the disparity is insane. So the golden crown like is that 1%, but most of that is comprised of like Americans who have sort of taken advantage of like a very liberal banking system, or a lot of them are, back in the day, they were like literal drug lords that would like launder their money in Panama, because the banking system was so liberal. But from the outside, like the IRS or whatever couldn't look into a Panamanian bank account and be like, oh, you're laundering money, or like this is fraud, and you claim this in your taxes in the US, but you have all this money here in this foreign nation. So it was really just a way for people to keep a lot of money safe and not be taxed on it. And so the 1% naturally just continues to get richer. They really just drain sort of all of those resources for themselves and all of that money. And the other 99% is living in like a literal third world country.
So if Panama is bringing in 5 to 7% of the trade through the canal, my guess would be that 5 to 7% of the trade is more valuable than the upkeep of the city. Why doesn't the US take over Panama? Because like my understanding is if they've got the most valuable transport with trade coming through America and going through the Panama Canal, surely it'd be valuable enough for the US to just go, no, we're going to take that. And if the city's booming and it kind of looks like Miami, there's big high rises on the water, there's clearly money there. What's stopping the US? Do you know?
Like, I do know, I mean, the Panama Canal Treaty of 1977, like, it basically says that the US is not allowed to have, like, American troops in the canal zone. So, like, basically there are, like, US, or there were and are US military bases, like, in Panama. It's, like, the Southern Command for the US Army, just where it's also positioned is just, like, extremely strategic for the US Army. So the US, like, there's always like the threat for Panamanians that the US, like, if they really wanted to, could just like take all their soldiers from those military bases and like invade the nation. Like, they absolutely could do that. I think they don't want to take on the burden, like, of, you know, the debt of the nation. Or, like I said, I'm not an economist, but there's a lot of like BS that comes with like swallowing up like a new nation. So I just don't think they are really interested in doing it. But it's interesting that you asked that, because the canal is something that the US does want, and Trump has been very like vocal about it. The reason why he's been vocal is because you know, the US is obviously in like there's a lot of tension with like China in terms of like spread of influence all over the world. Like, the US is worried that China's spreading their influence and taking up sort of like ground and resources that the US feels that they have a right to sort of have. In Panama, there were like these two Chinese companies that bought up the ports on either side of the canal. I'm not sure when they did it, but they owned either side of the canal, basically. So the threat for the US is that the Chinese could potentially, you know, delay American shipments passing through the canal. They could like screw with America, basically, by like having these two like strategic points and just like squeezing the Americans.
How did China acquire the ports?
They just bought them. They were they were just like available for purchase. I actually really don't know how that is even allowed. But they bought them, and so Trump was saying that this is like a huge threat to the US, because the Chinese could, you know, it's like a lot of our trade passes through the Panama Canal. Like, we can't have our enemy controlling what passes through this very important waterway. So what happened was BlackRock, the company, which I can't answer too many questions about it because I really don't know that much, but extremely wealthy American company. BlackRock ended up buying the ports off of the Chinese. So now the ports are owned by like an American company now. So America has like more power over the Panama Canal. And yeah, so I mean, nothing is really stopping the US from just putting troops there and taking it back. But it just, on the one hand, it goes against the treaty that was signed, like the peace treaty that was signed 50 years ago. But then on the other hand, like, if they do that, they got to deal with the consequences, which is like, okay, you're essentially taking on like a new nation. You know, like, how much money are you going to delegate to like feeding these people and to keeping up like the upkeep of like the infrastructure? And like, you got to worry about like just like a bunch of bullshit that they probably don't want to worry about, when all they really care about is the Panama Canal.
Is there any threats to the Panama Canal globally? Is there any things that could really impact global trade and impact everyday people going through their days?
I would say yeah. I mean, do you remember when that ship got stuck in the Suez Canal in Egypt a few years ago?
Don't.
It was like a cargo ship, and it like basically like got stuck in the Suez Canal in Egypt, which connects like the Mediterranean to like the Indian Ocean or whatever it is. So that boats don't have to go around like the Horn of Africa and like go like the long way. But this ship got stuck and just like blocked up all the trade. Like, boats couldn't pass through the canal, and it completely fucked up world supply chain for like weeks.
Did it purposely get stuck?
I don't know. That's actually a great question, and I think no matter like Elliot and I were talking about this too. Like, you should just always question everything. I think like people love to be conspiracy theorists and like put on their little tinfoil hat and like, you know, say that like aliens built the pyramids and all that, no matter what you believe. But I think it's always important to be like, why are people asking this question? Like, why was this the outcome? How did this happen? So it's a fair question, although, you know, the pilot or the ship captain or whatever you call them, probably just made like a really stupid mistake and like literally had like the worst day of work ever.
Yeah, I guess some days, sometimes we want to steer something however we can to make the story better, whereas it could have just been something so simple.
I bet it was just something like really silly that the guy just like really regrets doing, obviously, and like he just like completely screwed up. But it absolutely affects like world supply chain totally. There's an interesting fact that in the 1940s when like Pearl Harbor happened, like that brought like the US into World War II. The Japanese originally wanted to bomb the Panama Canal because it was actually, if the Japanese screwed up the Panama Canal and screwed up like the trade passing through, it would have been like a way bigger pain in the ass for the US military, because then they would have to get like, they couldn't like get their ships up through the canal. Like they would have to take them all the way down through like Argentina and then like all the way back up, like the ones that were sort of like in the Pacific or like in the Pacific or like by like the Western like Latin countries. So it would have been like a huge pain in the ass, but the Japanese, the only reason why they didn't do it was just because it was too far away. They would have had to get their boats close enough that they're like these like float plane bombers, like the kind of planes that like land on the sea, that they could take off close enough and then just drop bombs on the Panama Canal. And they estimated that just trade would have been like super screwed up for the US for like 3 months. But 3 months in a war is like such a long time. It just really it just like, it really affects like America so much that like they just have such an interest in keeping it running smoothly. And like, you know, to do that, they need to have control over it. So Panama, like negotiating that treaty in 1977 is like a massive deal for both parties, because Panama now has like this huge responsibility to make sure that it, you know, it runs smoothly. And then the US is sort of now like always looking over Panama's shoulder, being like, you know, are you good? Like, are there any risks? Like, are there any threats like being posed to us right now? And there's still like a huge interest there.
After spending so much time with Carlos and understanding all of these stories, like you have over 200 documents from the CIA and the DEA, how's your perception, relationship, thoughts, feelings on the US government and the people in power and the, I guess, intention they have behind their decisions? How do you feel about all of that?
I think like, I would say that after doing this, like my distrust of government has increased.
Why so?
I just think that like there's just we just really don't know what's going on, like as everyday civilians. Like we don't know what's going on because we're not supposed to know what's going on. Like if the American people were truly, if their sort of opinion, or if what they wanted was truly taken into consideration, like it would just be a nightmare for any sort of decisions to be made at like these really high levels. So what a lot of this ultimately comes down to is individual personalities. So, you know, you've got these guys making these decisions in foreign policy that are going to have like a ripple effect that's going to affect like millions of people all around the world. Like at the end of the day, they're working off either like statistics or they're working off like their gut. And like most times these like huge decisions are made at a table like you and like we're talking like we are right now. Like you and I are sitting down at the table and just like working it out, you know? So I would say like my distrust like is something that I think everybody should have. I don't think anybody should like fully trust their government. No matter what, they're not going to have like your best interest in mind. They have the nation's best interest in mind, which is fine. I'm just sounding like an individualist, which, you know, I kind of am. Like I like that. But that also being said, you know, I think that at the end of the day, like those really high level decisions are just, they're made by like human beings. People can make the wrong decisions. It all just comes down to motivation, which in government, like motivation always just seems to circle back to money. You know what I mean? It's never like, usually it's never about like civil rights or, you know, the safety of like our people. I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to like what's going to generate the government the most amount of money so that we can keep this country running, keep the lights on. So that's what I think. I mean, I sound kind of cynical when I say it a little bit, and then I probably also sound like a realist in other opinions that I have. But my brain, like, I just have a tough time. I just don't think there's like one answer for everything. I just think like decisions and personalities are like, you know, fluid and ever changing. And I think people in politics like naturally just have to be on their toes, and I just don't trust that somebody's motivation is always like the right one. You know, I think people act on their own self-interest quite a bit.
Yeah. So maybe their intention isn't, they don't really care about the people. Maybe they don't even care about the nation. They just care about themselves.
Yeah, they care about number one, themselves, you know, but like that's just human nature, you know?
Yeah. I wonder if we tie in this evil piece, and you brought up BlackRock and these big major companies that are probably making a lot of the decisions behind closed doors. I wonder who the manual like equivalent is now. Like, who's the puppets of the US right now?
Yeah.
Because like BlackRock aren't just buying the ports for no reason. They're buying it for power.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally, dude. Yeah.
So I wonder, like, who actually is making the decisions? And like, I'm fascinated by the actual reasoning and the messaging behind different things. Like why a certain message is being pushed and who's actually making that message being pushed. And you know, I just wonder about the corruption and what the intentions actually are behind all of these things. I think it's more important than ever to actually question everything and get to the bottom of why you think and kind of why things are going the way they are going. And if they serve you, great, onboard it. If you don't think they do, have the courage to not onboard it and disregard it. Mm-hmm. Because I think more than ever, we are getting more and more silenced because we're getting told something is true. And regardless of whether we feel it's true or not, we're scared to say we don't think it's true because we don't want to be left out and X, Y, and Z. And I feel like there actually is potentially, and call this cynical, but potentially there is a whole lot more corruption than maybe we think. And we're just blinding ourselves and acting dumb like it's not actually happening. You see so much stuff going on and you go, that can't be right. That's not true. Like, surely people aren't taking that as gospel. Surely they're questioning that. Surely they aren't throwing common sense out the door. Do you think there is a lot of corruption going on?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it seems to be like quite prominent. I think it's funny because I was just having like a discourse about this with someone like last week, and they were like, "Could you imagine if social media existed around the time of like the JFK assassination? Like what people would be saying on Twitter about it? Like it, you know what I mean? Like it is like is social media like shaping the way that we see the world and our governments that much more than, I guess, the way like people thought before social media was a thing? I do think so. I think that I think like herd mentality is like a real thing. I think that I think I'm actually taking this from Men in Black, the movie, but Tommy Lee Jones has like this great like quote in the movie. He tells Will Smith's character, he's like, you know, Will Smith's like, like, why don't we tell the world that like aliens exist and that our planet is like being shared with like all these other like life forms? And Tommy Lee Jones says, because people are like too panicky. He's like, a single person is smart, but people are dumb. And obviously that's in like a comedy movie from the 1990s, but it's so true. Like you can have like such a good conversation and like a debate with someone like one-on-one, but as soon as like audience comes into the situation and you're like, what you're saying is to like win over an audience, like to win over the most amount of people, like just like things change. You know what I mean? Like things change when there are that many voices in a room. And I think like you go online and you see people like expressing their distrust for like the current administration, and no matter what, there's like merit to what people on the ground floor of the country are saying because they're the ones experiencing it. But, you know, when you see somebody like posting about like the National Guard being in Portland or whatever, and like a liberal person on Twitter will post about it and be like, this is disgusting, this is terrible. And then the comments are suddenly are flooded with like Republicans being like, no, you're just like a snowflake or like whatever, and like whatever people say. And I just think that like you get in your own little echo chambers online, you believe what you want to believe, but at the end of the day, like none of that shit's affecting like what the government actually does. So hell yeah, like there's, no matter what, there's going to be corruption in government. But I think that like we just don't know the half of it. You know?
I wonder if it's not affecting what's being made, the decisions that are being made in government. Maybe that's true, but maybe, perhaps, the government are influencing what's being shown on the screens so that then they can indirectly influence what's happening in the government.
Dude, 100%. Like, have you seen... I really don't know too much about this, but didn't like Israel are now like sponsoring influencers on TikTok to like push pro-Israeli propaganda, and like like Israel's being like very open about it. They're saying like explicitly like we are doing this to get like our message out there so that people can, you know, understand like how we're feeling and like what we believe and like whatever. So hell yeah, like governments are putting so much money and time and resources into social media because like it's so powerful. Like
yeah, but that's public stuff. I wonder what's going on behind closed doors.
What do you mean by that?
Like the different propaganda, the different messaging that gets promoted online, and the intent behind the messaging and why it's being presented that way. Like, I wonder if it's actually because they believe the thing, or if they're just trying to influence a nation in a particular way to get what they want.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man. I don't know all the all the answers here, but I think the emphasis here is how do we just not take anything as gospel, anything, and just think. Like, you use like a level of thought, and a level of introspection, and a level of awareness, and a level of common sense with everything that we're presented with online.
Yeah.
Like if something's red and you can see it to be red, but then someone tells you it's blue, surely you're going to still think it's fucking red. But I feel like what's happening online is something's red, we know it's red, someone's selling us it's blue, and we just automatically adopt this belief that the fucking red is blue.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's like we're throwing common sense out the window. Is there anything that you've learned over the last couple of years, you know, about insider stuff and through all of these documents that you've gotten that you kind of can't unsee? Maybe was there any beliefs that you've had that you now don't have, or was there anything that's been debunked through your findings?
Not necessarily, but there's like this really cool sort of like string of documents that I uncovered that you know, they're from like the CIA, DEA, and Department of Justice. They're like this little bundle about the former like before Noriega, Omar Torrijos, the dictator before him. The US government had like arrested Omar Torrijos' brother's bodyguard in New York, right? And he was like smuggling cocaine, I guess, and he got caught. And in these documents between like CIA and DOJ and basically all within the US government, they were saying like, okay, we have leverage over the dictator now, like let's like use this against him. And they tried to like use it against him, like make his life miserable for like 8 years or something by trying to pin the arrest of like this bodyguard on the dictator and his brother, basically saying like, if your bodyguard is narco trafficking, then you guys must be too. But like in these documents, they explicitly say like, we're going to use this against them, you know? So it's like, it's very malicious. It's very like, it's a power play, you know? But I think like I was a blank slate going in. I wouldn't say I was like super naive. So like when I read stuff like that, I wasn't necessarily surprised. And I don't think people are going to be surprised by like the language that was used in those documents and like the motivations that like the US government or like the DOJ had, or the US government. But what I do think is just that like when it's so explicitly said on like a piece of official documentation that's been like kept secret for decades, like it's proof that the US government like lies to itself and to others. Because why would they tell the truth all the time? You know what I mean? It just I think it would just cause people to go into a frenzy if they knew everything that the government was doing all the time. Like I think unfortunately there has to be stuff done behind closed doors to get things done sometimes, you know? And not to say that like in a, like even in like a malicious way, like you got to do this, like you got to kill this guy. Like I actually don't believe in any of that stuff at all. Like I essentially a pacifist. Like I don't fight. Like rarely been in fights. Like I really do believe in using your words in peace as much as possible. But I think that like there are situations where, you know, for good and for bad, where like you got to do things that the people don't know about.
Do you think that you've gotten stronger and more tough and more direct with your time in the last couple of years?
Oh yeah, big time. I would like say yes to basically every opportunity. Like 2-3 years ago, if someone wanted to like have like a little screenplay, 10-page, 15-page like short movie screenplay written up, I would be like, hell yeah, like I'll do it for free, like I'll whatever, and I'd spend so much time like doing things to both like you know, increase my skills, and then at the same time to sort of like just do it, you know what I mean, to just like develop these relationships in the field that I want to be working in. And like I was just draining myself. I was just exhausted. I was like really unfulfilled. And then as this project sort of fell into my lap and became like my main focus, I was able to have the confidence to be like, no, this isn't worth my time. Or like somebody is like, well, I'll pay you $1,000 to write like a 90-page screenplay. I'm like, do you have any idea how long that's going to take me? Like, that's nothing. Where like I'm able to sort of contest people on, you know, things that are unfair now. But like 3 years ago, I just wouldn't have had the balls to like say no. And I would have just like said yes to any opportunity. So I'm way more direct now, for better, I think. Like I'm never mean or anything like that. I just like say what I mean and like mean what I say, and that comes back to like the conviction as well that I like really truly learned from Carlos. Just like if I believe something, like just say it and stand by it.
Why do you feel like you want to be in this line of work, and why have you designated your life to doing this?
It's like, you know, it's exciting. It's like really exciting. It gives me such a rush being in these environments that people consider risky. I think I do have like a love for like the art of storytelling, and even in various mediums. Like all of this started with my love of film. I didn't start by like being a huge book nerd and reading a ton of books. I loved just like stories that like really like made me feel the emotions they were like designed to make me feel. So like if I started crying at a movie, I'd literally be like happy that I was crying. I was like, hell yeah, like I'm so connected to this piece of art that I'm like literally moved by it, like to tears. Like I just like love that. So I would say like I can't get like any of this stuff out of my head. Like I have to write every day. If I don't do it, I just like don't feel right. Like I don't feel like I'm doing what I was like put on this earth to do, which is super corny, but it's also just like, if I'm not writing, like what else am I spending my time doing? Like nothing else is going to fulfill me as much as this. And then the like risky stuff is just truly, it's just like exciting. Like when you actually sit down to write the book, you're just like sitting in front of a laptop for like 8-10 hours a day. Like you're listening to music, you're like drinking coffee, you're smoking joints, like whatever you like to do while writing. But when you're out in the field and like you're actually on your feet and you're like sort of in touch maybe with like your like more like primal skills, where you're like, you know, you feel like you're a piece like a piece of prey and like everyone else are predators, like because everyone's like a criminal or has done all these like really illicit things. Like that just like is so exciting for me. Like I just absolutely love that. I get like such a rush being around those people. I'm not afraid to like tell like the dark side of their story, and then, you know, I'm not afraid to tell like the bright sides of somebody whose story is overwhelmingly dark, because I do believe in like dual representation of character, or like I guess really it's 3-dimensional representation of character, but showing not just like one side of someone. So yeah, dude, I really just at the end of the day I'm just obsessed with storytelling, and like that just manifests in me writing. I'm just not a good drawer, terrible with a camera. Like I just fell into writing because like that's what I'm best at, and that's how I tell the best stories.
Are you proud
Totally. Yeah. I'm super proud of the work that I do. I think that for me it's more like fulfilling, but pride, that sort of like external validation does feel really good when people like read a book of mine and they're like, oh, hey, I read your book, like it was great, like I read it all in one day, or like, you know, I loved when like this character did this or whatever. Like that just makes me feel so good. You know, that external validation is important, like that contributes to my pride, but like intrinsically, literally just like writing a book and then typing those last two words, the end, just like fills me with pride. Like it's like the greatest feeling ever for me. I just, like, I couldn't live without it.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
What do you feel like's missing in your life at the moment?
Money. No, well, money, yeah, but I've been doing this for like 10 years. I'm sort of at a point where I finally have written something that I think has like really like genuine appeal. I think a lot of people are really interested in espionage and like politics and especially when the book is like written like a thriller. I feel really excited about the book, like this book, The Right Hand Man. So I think what's missing from my life right now, joking aside, like talking about money, I think that I'm ready for like the next stage of this career. The last 10 years were like such a struggling artist. Like I'm ready to step it up and now feel what it's like having the responsibility of being able to tell like a truly great story that isn't selling out or isn't just sort of like moving in the direction of like what the masses are interested in and just sort of like being convicted in telling the stories that I want to tell. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is like I just want to continue to sort of have this like genuine, real, raw, organic obsession about what I'm doing and not let those external factors like, you know, sway the like true love that I have for what I do.
So if you were to remove the money factor, remove the accolades factor, and you would actually think about like life, happiness as a whole, peace, joy, fulfillment, like what do you think is an aspect of your life that might be missing to help you unlock that true kind of happiness?
I don't know. It's a good question. You know, like I have a girlfriend, like it's a great relationship. That's been like 6 months. So that, you know, that sort of like very important part of life and living is actually really great right now. Like stability is something that I think about quite a lot. Like I have zero stability in my life. Like I travel all the time. I literally still don't even have a home. I've just been like traveling country to country. I was living in Mexico for a few months, like Panama. I was in Rome, Boston, Ireland, like just going all over and living the life of sort of like a vagabond, like writer, because that's what I think is like cool. But I know that that like can't last forever, and I think that like I don't want to like tie myself down, but I do think like I need like more stability in my life. Like I can't be so volatile and like I need to be able to wake up every day and know what I'm doing. Whereas like now I sort of wake up every day and I'm just like a little bit chaotic and I'm like, okay, as long as I write like 1,000 words, like then I'll be happy with how today goes. But I end up just putting all my focus on my work and I don't leave room for like socializing with friends, like keeping up relationships with my literal best friends of like 20 years. I'm like by putting so much time into like only career, like only writing, like then I'm not, you know, keeping parts of myself open to like learn about like new things or like new hobbies that could be really cool for me. So I think that like sort of single focus obsession can't last forever. And I would just like to have like stability so that I can get all that stuff done while still like exploring like the beauties of life and not be so bogged down with like this one idea of like success in writing.
Yeah, it's this forever dance because you kind of need to be one-dimensional to achieve the greatness in the first place, but the one-dimensional nature isn't really one thing that you can have for your whole life because you want to be able to branch out and broaden. But in order to get there on your mission when you're in your infancy of that mission, you kind of need to. It's this weird balance of finding this balance. And, even yesterday I was saying on a podcast that maybe balance isn't even something that we need to be striving for. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, dude. Thank you for your time. Thanks for coming to LA. And is there anything you want to say before we wrap out?
No, dude, this has been absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm going to leave your details in the show notes description below. When's the book out?
It's out November 4th.
November 4th. Yeah, cool. So if we've released this before then be sure to check it out. I'll leave all of the details in the show notes below. But if you're listening to this after then, go and grab a copy of The Right Hand Man.
Yep, The Right Hand Man.
Cillian Dunne.
Yeah.
And you can go and follow along the journey. But I wish you all the best. And hopefully you keep on crushing it like you are.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you guys for signing out. See you later. Bye-bye.